All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Alessandra Torrey, and I'm here with our BingeBooks Book Club chat for June. I'm joined today by Julianne MacLean, who's going to be talking all about her book, These Tangled Vines. So I'm so excited. Welcome, Julianne. And everyone, if you just missed my intro, thank you for joining the BingeBooks Book Club chat. We're here with Julianne. Julianne, do you just want to introduce yourself and give a little bit of what you write about?
Sure. I'm Julianne MacLean, as you guys know, and I mostly write contemporary women's fiction. But I started out writing historical romance many years ago. So I've written about 40 novels now, and I think Tangled Vines was number 40. So yeah, it's hard to believe the time has gone by that fast. Um, but yeah, no, I write for like Union right now. I've also indie published as well. So, which was great. I loved it. I love being independent as an author. But yeah, so I'm excited to talk to everybody today about these tangled vines.
And we've got some great, is that me? Is
Yeah,
anyone
we're
else
getting
there?
some feedback.
Um, okay, we have some great questions, but if anyone watching has a question as we go, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you, or you can pop in the chat, I have a question, and we'll call on you if we can't see you because not everyone has their cameras on. So please feel free to join in and chime in as you have questions. But to start off, can you give us your writing story and how did you start? I know you said this is book 40. I didn't hear how long that was, but was writing something you always wanted to do? How did you kind of get into this and when did you become full-time?
Yeah, I started when I got married. I was about 27, and I just thought at the time that writing a romance novel would be something cool and fun to do. And I was an accountant and an auditor at the time. And once I started writing my first book just for fun, and it was a historical romance, I kind of got the writing bug and I decided I just didn't want to be an accountant anymore. So I left that career behind. And back then, this would have been about 1990, 98, 97. And back then it was, it was pretty tough to sell a book to a publisher. And it took me 6 years, and it was my fifth novel that sold to Harlequin. So I just never gave up that whole time. And so when I finally sold to Harlequin, I wrote 3 books for them, and then I moved to Avon and wrote 9 books for them. And then I moved to St. Martin's Press, and I wrote 6 books for them. And then I went totally indie, which was very liberating and fun.
So those first 4 books, I don't know why. The first 4 books that you wrote before you sold your fifth, did you end up indie publishing those later, or did you end up selling those to publishers later, or are they still sitting in a drawer somewhere?
Most of them are sitting in a drawer, or or worse. One of them I did self-publish because I just felt like it was good enough, but the other ones, honestly, they just weren't good enough. And one of them was a book. Actually, I had this other book that I started and got rejected by Harlequin when I turned in my second book to them. They said no to that, and at the time I thought, I didn't understand why. I thought it was fine. And but only now, like 20 years later, when I went back and read that manuscript, I was like, oh no, they were right. This wasn't so good. So yeah, I've tossed some things. I definitely have. And but I'm happy with the stuff that I've chosen to self-publish. And there was one book that I think I just worked on it more than all the rest, and I never gave up on it because I thought it was a good storyline, and I still think it was. That book is one of the time travels I have out now. It's called A Time for Love, and that was, that one made the rounds to the publishers and got rejected everywhere. No one wanted to buy it, but it's done well as an indie book, so I'm happy about that now.
I love those covers for the Time Traveler. They just look so cool for that series. I look at them when I'm programming
Yeah.
But so Tangled Vines is not historical romance. It's, I guess, women's fiction. Is that what genre you would classify it, or?
Yeah, it's contemporary women's fiction, except it's a dual timeline, so it does go back in time a bit, but it goes back to 1986, so it's not really historical, although some depends on when you were born. Some people might consider that a historical period. But that was really fun to write that because yeah, I was a teenager in the 80s, so it was all very familiar. And it's fun, and the book I'm writing right now is set in the early 90s. And it's so much fun to write when no one had cell phones and, not even cordless phones. Like there was, they had to get up to go to answer the phone, the wall phone. Um, and no one could keep track of each other to know where they were, and would lose touch for years. And it just, I don't know, it's so much easier to come up with dramatic situations without the cell phone. It kind of gets in the way of suspense sometimes.
Oh, it's a form of fun. Yeah, all sorts of things. I might have to have someone else take over these questions if this continues. We'll see. For those who are watching who may not have read the book, can you give us a short introduction to the story and Fiona and her complicated family and situation?
Sure. So this is a story about a young woman who finds out she's inherited some property in Tuscany from a father that she never met. But she did know that the father that raised her was not her biological father. But that biological father doesn't know. So she has to travel to Italy and find out what she inherited. And when she gets there, she discovers it's a winery that's worth a significant amount of money. And the family members are not happy about that at all because they thought they were going to get it. So there's lots of sibling rivalry that ensues. And then, of course, we have to find out why she was left this winery, and his legitimate children were left very little. So that's kind of the mystery of the novel, is what actually happened and why was she so important to this man that never even met her.
I love that. I love where the book began. It jumped right into all of the excitement. And so where did the idea from this book come from? Was this something you've been thinking about for a while? What was the kind of instigating idea?
Yeah, I actually really like this question because normally all of my plots that I come up with, it takes me a really long time to come up with a concept. And I find the writing of the book is the easier part. Like once I know what the story is, it's just a daily kind of, 5 to 10 pages a day and you're done. But coming up with the story idea, and the plot, I struggle with that a lot. So after I wrote A Fire Sparkling for Lake Union, which is a World War II book, I didn't know what to do next. And I thought, well, I'll just do another World War II book because I had all this research in my head still. And so I wrote up the proposal and we went to contract on that and everything. And the publisher was like, yes, we like this story. But then when we got close to me starting to write it, we both decided, and I was really hesitant about it because I didn't want to get pigeonholed as a World War II writer. And I knew I was going to be writing more just straight contemporaries in the future. So then my editor said, well, let's come up with another story quick because I have a deadline. And I'm like, quick, this is a problem because it sometimes takes me months to come up with just an idea. And so she said, well, let's get on the phone and brainstorm. She said, bring some ideas and I'll bring some ideas. And I'm like, bring some ideas, what? Anyway, I did manage to bring two, which were okay. And she brought four, which she came up with in 24 hours, which I'm so jealous of writers that have. I hear of writers that have drawers full of ideas and not enough time to write everything. I'm the opposite. I have no ideas and would like to just be writing. But anyway, so it was my editor that said, okay, what about a woman who inherits property, and when she goes and gets there, the family hates her guts? And that's all she gave me. And I went, I think I could work with that. So then we already had the trip to Tuscany book.
So whose story do you think this is? Because when I was reading it, it's really interesting to see the rotating points of view. And even though it's a first person point of view from Fiona's point of view, to me, it seems like the heart of the story is Lillian's story, and, Fiona was sort of reacting to that in some ways and trying to rediscover her past through Lillian's story. So did you did you struggle with that at all? Like figuring out like, there's a pull from different kind of characters who want to take it in certain kind of directions, or like whose story is this?
Yeah, that's the challenge of writing a dual timeline book, is it's easy to have one story take over. And sometimes the author is just more interested in one storyline over the other.
Yeah.
And I will admit that I was kind of more, invested and emotionally invested in Lillian's story, because it is more, that's where the real drama is.
Yeah.
But whenever, the one thing I try to do when I do a dual timeline is to make sure that both storylines at least are interesting. Because sometimes one storyline can just be put like filler and padding just to support the other story. And I wanted to make sure there was some urgency in Fiona's story as well. So for her, it was finding those letters, and she had a goal of her own, and the sibling rivalry and all that stuff. But from an emotional perspective, definitely Lillian's story, that's where the love story was and the tragedy was. And so I think it would naturally resonate more. But when I wrote them, it's funny, I've done a few dual timelines now. And when I did A Fire Sparkling, which is World War II dual timeline, I wrote that book from page 1 to page whatever in order. So I would write one character in the contemporary time, and then I would do the historical period, and then I'd come back to the contemporary, and I was writing it in order the whole time. And then when I wrote Tangled Vines, I wrote Lillian's story in its entirety. I think I wrote just the beginning where Fiona gets the phone call that she's inherited and she arrives. And as soon as I go back in time to Lillian's time period, then it was just, I just wrote that whole thing until it was done. And then I wrote Fiona's stuff and had to plug it in at the appropriate places, which was very challenging to make it kind of weave it together seamlessly, or appearing like it was seamless. But I did one timeline first, and then the other timeline. And now I'm doing the book that I'm writing now is another dual timeline book, and I'm doing the same thing again. I've already written about the historical part, which is 1990 or 86 and 90 again. But and now I'm in the contemporary part, which I'm again having to weave it in. But I think like if I stay with the story that my heart is invested in, if I could stay with that until it's done and stay in that zone, I find I'm more passionate about it, and I don't like lose touch with what that, like you said, it's the heart of the story. Like I don't lose touch with the hearts of those characters and where they are and the state of mind and their emotions, and to stay with them until they're done.
Yeah, fantastic. Alessandra, do you want to invite questions from people who are here?
Absolutely. Yeah. Does anyone watching have a question? Not to put you on the spot.
And you don't have to type it into the chat. You can just unmute.
I'd love to ask a question. I'm married to a writer, and I work with the team at BingeBooks, so I know a lot of writers. I just wondered what it's like writing about a writer, given that the dad's a writer. Is that kind of quite a weird thing to do?
Yeah, and especially the writer in this story was very self-involved and selfish. And I think when you're a writer, it is a very solitary profession, and you have to be alone a lot, and you kind of have to shut out the rest of the world. And I carry a lot of guilt about that with, my husband's so wonderful. He has lots of his own interests, and he's happy to go biking or whatever and leave me alone for a while. But I do feel guilty about that. And I think when I was writing his character, I wanted to make him the thing that I didn't want to be, which is, sort of self-centered and everybody go away and leave me alone to write. But I think I do carry that little bit of guilt in me. So I don't know what I was doing there when I was writing that character, but I'm not like Freddie, just so you know. I always, do put family first, and would never leave anybody to go off on my own like he did. But and I'm also conscientious of the other people in the household and how my lifestyle affects their lives, because sometimes it's, I don't tell everyone to be quiet, like in the house. Like sometimes people say, hear about writers and everyone has to be quiet during writing time. And I don't do that, but I do need quiet. So I have sound reduction headphones, and I sort of adjust my stuff around them so I don't, intrude on them so much. So, and that's, I don't know. I think I do try to not be one of those self-involved writers that it's all about the book. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it's good. I like. Yeah, thank you. That was
And
very
before we
illuminating.
go, before we go to Eric, did AL, were you raising your hand, or were at Caldwell? No. No. Okay. I think go ahead. Eric, you had a question?
Yeah, I just more on Freddie. Excuse me, but were you tempted to just really stick it to him in the end? I mean, I really thought he was a horrible character throughout. I thought he was far
Yeah.
worse than Connor. I mean, the guy couldn't even drive well,
Yeah.
And in the end, when it's revealed that he knew what was going on all along, I wanted her just to fly off to Tuscany and leave him in the lurch. I thought you were a little too kind on him. Were you tempted to treat him a little differently?
That's a great question, because you know what? The first draft, she did do that. There was not as much forgiveness. She did go home and talk to him, and they didn't have that opening up, that conversation where they both where he said he was sorry, and they didn't get there. And she said, Dad, I'm going, bye-bye. And she did. And that was the way that scene played out. And my editor suggested that there should be some forgiveness and growth here for everybody. And also he was worse in the original draft. Like early on, I actually made him a little bit less selfish in the second draft. So he was worse in the first draft. So anyway, that's interesting that you asked that question. That's funny. Yeah, but as far as sticking it to Freddie too, yeah, yeah, no, I'm sorry. I'm just thinking, I'm trying to remember back to how that first draft played out, but yeah, he ended up more alone for sure than how it ended. And I think though also a lot of the books that I've written and in my own life, I really believe in forgiveness for people that have made mistakes and are flawed. And I just think that's a better way to live, and you're happier as a person if you don't carry anger towards others. And also growth. I like to think that people grow in their lives in real life. I know I have, and certainly the characters that I write, it's always really important to me to make sure that there's a lot of growth. There's good character arcs for everybody. Although Connor didn't quite get that. Although in the original version, Connor did come around. And that's one of the other thing that my editor told me to not do. Just let him continue to be alone and unhappy. Oh, sorry, I hope I'm not giving away spoilers here, but
that's a really interesting that he was kind of redeemable in the end in an earlier draft, but then you kept him true to. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Ellen said you included lots of sensory details in the book, such as food, wine, painting, and them in the pool and things. Was that easy to write initially, or do you go back and kind of add in that layer of depth and visual details later?
I usually write that all in the first draft. It's just the way I write from the start. I tend to, I think in my imagination, I really go to the place and go inside the person's head and in their body and in their skin. And I like to, like every sentence, I'm seeing what are they seeing and feeling what they're feeling. And that all comes out in the very first draft. Yeah, I don't go back later, and there might be some things I need to research, like details. And I have a thing where when I'm writing the first draft and there's something I don't know, like something specific that I have to look up, I'll just go because I write longhand, I write like a double X, XX, and I'll leave that part blank. And then and I also type it into the manuscript when the manuscript gets typed, and so that when I get to when it's time to turn in the book to the publisher, I can do a search for XX and find any things that I didn't look up yet. So that's sort of my system.
That's great. The dynamic between family members is very intense, but also very realistic. Did you base those relationships on real experiences in your life or people you knew, or how were you able to portray kind of that crazy dynamic in such a great fashion?
It wasn't anybody that I knew. But I think I mentioned before that in some places that the character of Connor, I was watching the series Succession when I was writing the book. And if I could have this made into a movie, I would have that, what's his name? Culkin, you know who I mean, who plays, he plays Roman in Succession. He would be Connor. Like I was picturing him and hearing him and the way he would say things and such. Sorry, he was so sarcastic. But everybody else, no. Sometimes I would try to picture a character as somebody. I watched a movie that had Antonio Banderas in it while I was writing the book. And when I was looking at him, I thought, yeah, that's what Anton would look like and talk like. But even when I'm writing it, I'm not seeing Antonio, I'm seeing just the character that's in my imagination. But if I was going to cast the movie, then yeah. Although he's Spanish and my character's British, but still. Yeah.
That's okay. Corrine has a question. You want to ask that directly?
Yeah, where is?
There we go. Oh, sorry. I was just trying to figure out how to unmute. Hi, Julianne. Good to see you. I just want to know, like, I'm really perplexed by the idea that you write longhand. Like, I just am wondering how long does it take you to write a book that way? I guess I'm so used to computers that it's just, I don't know if I could write anything longhand. So it's kind of, I'm interested about your process and how that works for you.
Yes, I didn't always write longhand. I would write on a laptop, and but every once in a while I would just get tired of being hunched over the keyboard. And the first time I wrote longhand, I went to a coffee shop and I thought, well, I'm just going to see if I can write this chapter and I have a coiled notebook and an Eversharp pencil, and it actually, I just found creatively, like I just was able to let go. There was the editor went away, and the internal editor in your mind, and I can I scratch. It's easy to scratch things out and just keep writing. And maybe it's a physical thing of just the movement of the pen and the hand and the brain to the hand and all that stuff. But I just find I can let go and get into the zone a lot easier when I'm writing longhand. When I'm typing, I'm more conscious of the words on the page. And like when I'm writing longhand, it's just I'm where the characters are. But then I do have to obviously type it up to send it in to my publisher, but I don't type. And this is another issue, is that after 35 books, I started to have some issues with my neck and my shoulder just from bad posture, and I should have had a better chair years ago. And so I have dictation software now, and I stand up every morning. I will dictate what I wrote the day before, and I'll do that at my standing desk, and then it's in the file, and I have a Word file. And so the only time I really am at a keyboard is when I'm in revision mode. So I've got most of the manuscript now, but it's rough. It's the raw dictated version. So I'm going to have to go over that whole thing before I send it in to my editor, because there's going to be errors from dictation, for one thing, because sometimes it just hears the wrong word. But also I just like to polish the next draft. So yeah, that's what I do. But it was the two reasons. It's because, my shoulder issues, and I think I need to go see a chiropractor is what I need to do. Anyway, yeah.
So how long does it take? Because I think that's what should
Right. It doesn't it probably does add some time, but not that much, because I have a thing where I write, even when I was typing the manuscript, I would write, say, 7 pages a day. And then the next morning, I would always go back and revise those 7 pages before I would start writing more new stuff. So it's still the same thing. My revision time in the mornings is just dictation. So it doesn't really change it that much. And yes, so I'm constantly revising when I dictate, and I am making little changes and stuff. So
overall, what, 6-9 months per book?
oh, that question. Well, there was a time I was writing, when I was writing my Color of Heaven series, I was publishing a book every 3 months. Like, I was writing like crazy. I would do 40 pages a week basically till I got to the end. But now I've slowed down a bit, and I do 30 pages a week. So if you do the math, however long the book is, that's how long it takes. So it takes maybe 3 months to do a first draft. And then but that's another thing, I'm very strict with myself about finishing the first draft at least 2 months before my deadline. So I have 2 months to revise and polish. I would never in a million years send my editor, like, type the end and then email it to my editor. Like, never. Like, I have a critique partner who will read it as well as my first reader, and she'll give me feedback. So I'll do my own revision, before I even send it to my editor. So I think that helps my reputation with the publisher, because when they get something from me, they get a good quality product, and and maybe in their minds they go, wow, this author's really good. It's like, well, no, you didn't read the first draft. That wasn't so good. But I'm just really conscientious about making sure that what I submit to the editor is the very, very best I can do. And I don't type the end and hit send. I do my own revisions first. And so it goes through a lot of revisions then, because then I have to do it with the editor as well. But it gets it better every time. Every revision, it gets better. So I think that helps the book at the very end.
Can I ask one last process question, if we can get through these technical difficulties here? And that is, it seems like you're going back and forth between 2 completely different genres, right? So you're right, mostly contemporary women's fiction, but also Regency romances, Victorian romances. So how do you decide, how to go back and forth? Do you have like completely different readerships for those 2 genres, or how do you work that in your mind?
I do have some crossover readership, but not a lot. It's mostly different readerships. But as for my historical romance day, I hate to say this to my historical romance readers, but I don't think I'm going to be writing any more historical romance. Those are my first 20 books were historical romance. And then I switched. I started writing that Color of Heaven series. And so I wrote 13 books right in a row. Although at that time I did throw in a couple of Highlander romances in the middle there. But generally I'm pretty much done with historical romance now. And those are my backlist titles. And I recently reissued them, and I did a polish on them, and I got the rights back from the publishers and put new covers on them. So it seems like they're new releases, but they really aren't. These are older titles. So moving forward, I'm just writing contemporary, and not just contemporary, but dual timeline books. Like I did that World War II dual timeline book. So there's I'm kind of jumping around a bit, but as far as historical romance, those are just backlist titles now.
Thank you.
Are there anywhere we'll let Julianne leave, and we'll continue to discuss the book as readers? Does anyone have any final questions before that happens? And Kristen?
I want to announce the winners of the signed copies. So we have Sue Moore, Ellen Buki, and Carla Sutel. I'm going to put my email in the chat. If you could email me your mailing address, that would be really helpful so we can create the shipping labels.
Can I just say something? Yeah, congratulations, yay. Can I just say something? If any of the winners, if there's a different book you'd rather have from me, like if you've already read Tangled Vines and you'd like to have something else, just let me know and I'll be happy to send you anything from my backlist.
And we had one final question. If Bobby, do you want to ask it aloud? Where's Bobby? Do I see? There she is. You're muted.
Okay. Yes, I was really impressed with the description of marriage as being a covered wagon and two people were pulling it, but when one's sitting in the wagon and the other one does all the pulling, it just immersed me in the entire story. I mean, it made it so clear, and it was really effective. I'm just wondering where you get your descriptive images from.
Right. Well, the covered wagon thing, my first book that I wrote, my debut novel, was called Prairie Bride, and it was all about covered wagon stuff and Little House on the Prairie. So, and I grew up with Little House on the Prairie, so I think that's where that came from. But as far as that idea of being a partnership in a marriage, I've been married for 28 years, and that's the way we are with each other, my husband and me. Like, we're both sort of equal partners, and I've sometimes seen other couples where maybe not just in marriage, and couples I knew when I was young and growing up, and boyfriends and girlfriends, where one person might just be more of a taker than a giver. And I think it's so important for it to be a good 50-50 thing, where some days, he needs me and I need to give more to him, whether someone's sick or whatever, like that happens in life. But yeah, it's a dynamic I've seen with people, and maybe not just marriages, like friendships, where maybe one person needs the other person to take care of them and provide for their happiness and be responsible for their happiness. And I just think that's, it's better if you can be responsible for your own happiness and give to the other person. And when you're both giving, the relationship is just wonderful, I guess. I have a great marriage and great husband who's very giving to me, and I'm giving to him. I like to give back in equal parts. So we're always supportive of each other. Yeah, if he wants to go to karate class on a Friday night, I'm like, go honey, have a good time. Like, I wouldn't dream of saying, but you're supposed to spend that time with me. Like, you know what I mean? It's not about, it's about giving to the other person. Like, anyway, sorry, that's a really long-winded answer. Sorry.
That was great.
Yeah.
And A.L. Caldwell, did you want to ask your question aloud, or I can't find you there?
Yeah, sure. And actually, it was sort of what Bobby asked, but actually, so I actually have two questions. But the first one is, love The Color of Heaven, and that's how you became like one of my favorite authors. So will there be more Color of Heaven?
I've learned to never say never, and there might be. It depends on how long I continue my relationship with Lake Union, because everything they want from me is usually a standalone book. So if the day comes where I decide not to publish with them anymore, I will probably do another Color of Heaven book. And interestingly, my book, Curve in the Road, which is a Lake Union novel, that was going to be book number 14 in the Color series. But I wrote the whole thing and I was ready to publish it, and it just would have had a different title. It could have been The Color of something else. And but Lake Union wanted it, and it was going to have to be a standalone. They wouldn't have wanted book number 14 in a series. So that's where that went. But I think all my books are kind of like, moving forward, I think any book I write could probably have some element of it that could be in that series, because I don't know, the themes that I write about are always those same themes. So yeah, so maybe I might.
Well, that kind of goes into my second question and what Bobby was asking, because I noticed that your themes are, first of all, they kind of align with my life. So thank you for that. But in this particular book, you dealt with the females and them either having to make the choices of being loyal to someone in their, someone that they love, or having to go at it on their own, or taking care of themselves. And for instance, Connor, and of course, whether she was going to get a divorce or not, Fiona to take care of her dad, and then of course Lillian, who was like the superstar of the book. But I mean, I don't know if I would have made the same choices she made. However, I saw the theme of the females making these choices, whether to be loyal or whether to, make sure you take care of themselves. How much of that is personally attribute to your life, or is there someone who, well, I'm sure a lot of people who have to make those decisions, but if you want to speak about that.
Sure. Yeah. In this book, I think there's a lot of the female characters are making sacrifices. They sacrifice something that they want for themselves for someone else. And I think we all do that every day in small ways and in big ways. And even it can be something as small as you wanting to watch a movie when your husband wants to watch basketball. And like, so I think, I don't know, I guess I can't really relate it to any specific events, and all the events that the characters went through. I can't really relate those to any events that I went through, but yeah, I think it is about deciding when you're going to make a sacrifice and how big is that sacrifice, and I guess it depends on the situation and the person. And yeah, that's a good question. I'll probably be thinking about that tonight when I go to sleep about a better answer for that. But yeah, I think it's about sacrifice, which we all do. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, we're gonna let, if no other questions, we're gonna let Julianne head off for the day and get back into the writing cave. And if you'd like to stick around, feel free to. We're gonna just discuss a few discussion questions as readers. So feel free to stick around and join in on the chat. But thank you so much for joining us and for giving us this beautiful book. So it was such a pleasure to have it and to have you here today.
Oh, thank you. Thanks
for
for
those
having
viewers who haven't read it yet, check it out. It's a really great book. So congrats on the success of it, Julianne.
Oh, thank you so much. And thanks for having me. This was fun. Okay, bye. Bye, everybody.